I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting that we've got. And this is particularly relevant because everybody is particularly interested in green IT. And what we have within the using the sea is even better and possibly more efficient than using solar, wind and nuclear. But more of that later. Now, at this stage, I would like to introduce you to Rear Admiral Rob Stevens.
Good evening.
Particularly knowledgeable, not only from the naval point of view, but also from the underwater point of view. So at that stage, what I would like to do is pass on at this moment across to Rob. And let's see, just make sure we are actually recording. And are we recording safely?
I've had something come up, Margaret, so.
Is it coming up saying we're recording?
Yeah.
Brilliant. And Kerry, could you just confirm we're recording successfully?
You are, yes.
Can we actually get the text at the bottom?
Oh, yes, of course. 2 seconds.
Would that be all right with you, Rob?
Yes, certainly.
Yep, you'll need to enable it at your end, Margaret. You should have a request to do that. Yep, that's working. Great. You're good to go.
Great. Thank you very much, Kerry. In which case, I'd like to pass you across to Rear Admiral Rob Stevens, that will actually be presenting this session. The slides for this will be available in about a week's time, and the video for this session will be available probably in about 3 weeks. So at that stage, I'd like to pass across to Rob Stevens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margaret, and thank you for inviting me to speak. It's hiding in plain sight title, so it's still, I'm really pleased to offer a little insight into what we're trying to achieve. But before I start, perhaps I should introduce myself. I'm Rear Admiral Rob Stevens. I'm the chair of the Perpetuus Tidal Energy Centre, and we're a very small company aspiring to establish tidal stream energy as a main source of renewable energy. My background, I had a career in the Royal Navy as a submariner, so I have a fairly reasonable grasp of underwater technology, and then went on to become the chief executive of British Marine. That's a trade association dealing with leisure marine, and then did a government study on maritime growth in the Solent for Michael Fallon, and then went on to look at composite regulation as well, before I was picked up and asked to become the chairman of the Tidal Stream Energy organization, which is PTEC. What I propose to do during this presentation is to give you a little bit of background first on the strategic backdrop to the energy world, particularly relevant at the moment. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about how tidal stream energy could make a contribution to the renewable energy. And then I'd go on to talk about the Perpetuus tidal energy site on the Isle of Wight. The climate change, of course, is a concern, and I won't wax too lyrical because it's pretty obvious to most that we have a problem with climate change. The greenhouse gases are absorbed by the oceans, but the increase in water temperature will reduce that efficiency rate. The main issue, though, is on the land, where industrialization, increased land usage, wars are exacerbating climate change and driving up energy prices. This, as we know, is causing extreme weather, fires, droughts, famines, and further reducing the natural land and the plant life through which photosynthesis would have reduced the CO2 levels. Interestingly, overall wind strength is dropping at the moment in climate change, and droughts are causing some nuclear power stations to shut down through lack of cooling water. So you won't be surprised to hear me make the compelling logic that if excessive land usage is removing natural CO2 absorption and causing ocean levels to rise, then logically, we should be taking our energy generation to sea, especially as 75% of the globe is covered by water. So I would argue that makes tidal energy the most attractive renewable proposition from an environmental perspective. Just looking at some of the energy prices briefly, you can see that natural gas increased by 1,250% in Jan 2020. So I think this makes a compelling logic as well that we should be looking for alternative sources of energy from a strategic and from an environmental perspective. On that note, it might be interesting just to look now at where we get our energy from. And what I've got here is a link to the web, which will show where the energy is being generated at the moment. This is the energy dashboard that you can all dial into using the same link. But as you can see, we're using about 40 gigawatts of power at the moment. 21 gigawatts of that, fossil fuels, i.e. 51%, is coming from fossil fuels. 15% is coming from renewables, and nearly 5% is coming from the other source of renewables as well, low carbon. Our aim in Tidal is to try and replace some of the fossil fuels and some of the low carbon as well, to contribute to an overall mix which is much more favorable to the environment. Moving now to the actual usage. This slide will show you how much energy has been used in the recent period up to 2021. What we can see here is that there is still a huge amount of fossil fuel being used, even though we've driven down the coal. And there's still less tidal than we would think would be useful. Interestingly, and I'll come back to this point, a wind drop of 15% and French nuclear power stations being laid off because of defects and drought contributed to the increase in fossil fuel usage. That covers the strategic backdrop. What I'd like to do now is just have a look at how tidal stream energy could help and what are the strategic advantages of tidal stream. Firstly, it's a proven concept. Often people say that, oh, it's just difficult technology and it'll never work. There are a number of power stations operating all over the world at the moment, which are proving that tidal turbines work extremely well. And most of these, encouragingly, have come from Britain. Much of the cabling expertise is in place because it's being used for wind, offshore wind in particular. And that, when we merge into the tidal, can also help reduce the costs. And I talk a lot about costs, and you'll see why in a minute. For the technically minded, this means that tidal is at technology readiness level 9, i.e. we're just waiting for investment now before we go to at-scale deployment. And this success has caused the government to have another look at tidal and make a small step towards commercializing it. In fact, in the last bullet, you can see that the UK government has ring-fenced £20 million worth of money to be used just for tidal. That's 40 megawatts. Now, it's a very small amount, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think the other thing to remember here is once the government starts to make policy changes to say tidal is an acceptable form of renewable energy, then suddenly it releases all sorts of investment. And we're looking forward to that. However, at the moment, it's still a very small part of the energy portfolio. And I'm reminded of Liddell Hart's quote, famous historian, when talking about the military, but I think it applies to most industries. The only thing more difficult than getting a new idea in is getting the old ideas out. And that certainly applies to tidal. There are economic advantages to going fully commercial with tidal as well. There is a huge global market, and it could also be an industrial game changer. This is a brand new, clean manufacturing industry. It'll bring jobs and regenerate the post-industrial ports and coastal areas. The global market is huge as well, and I'll show you a slide after this to see just how big it is. Furthermore, Britain is well known for its maritime trained forces or maritime expertise. So we have a trained workforce who could pick up this new industry and run with it. And I say it is a game changer. And moving forward, you can see that the offshore renewable energy catapult has estimated that the GVA for GB for Great Britain would increase by 1.4 billion, and it could create 4,000 jobs around UK by 2030, provided we move quickly now. Looking at the global potential, you can see here from a study in Delft University that there are tidal resources all over the world. And that 0.5 terawatt is, of course, using the current technology, which is still very immature and can be much more efficient eventually. In fact, only last week, I had a company turn up to talk to me about vertical mounted turbines, which could then exploit tidal flow down at around 0.5 of a meter per second, and that's extremely low. So the potential is much greater than even I'm showing here. And in terms of money, 76 billion for the Highlands and Islands have estimated is available for UK. And the predicted green hydrogen global market in 2050, but now that includes wind as well, is $700 billion. So not only is it good for the environment, but economically, it could be extremely good as well. Talking about the environment, let's now just talk a little bit about the environment as well. I'm quite convinced that the environment will assume increasing importance, and I anticipate that there'll be government legislation shortly to start driving renewable energies, wind, solar, and tidal harder in order to produce green hydrogen and a hydrogen economy within 5 years. So what are the environmental credentials of tidal streams and tidal farm? Firstly, it's at sea and not on the overused landmass. Secondly, because water is so much more dense than air, the power generated by a tidal turbine is much stronger than the equivalent wind turbine. In fact, for a tidal farm, its terrestrial footprint is 1/8 of the size of a wind farm for the same output. Furthermore, our experience over the 15 to 20 years that we've been operating has shown that it does not harm fish life because the turbines are turning so slowly. In fact, when you isolate areas for a tidal farm, it makes like a reef-like qualities and will enhance fish breeding and certainly reduce overfishing. And recently and excitingly, we have also worked out that linking of tidal farm power stations with differing time flows could produce continuous power. And that's shown in this slide here. This is the tidal flow around Great Britain. And you can see on the figures, -1, -2, -3, -1, they are the different times at which high water occurs. So the flows in the channel and the flows in the Bristol Channel are different. So if you actually take tide power from those areas, then you will actually get continuous power. What does that mean? Well, that's called base load. And it means that we have less need for fossil fuel gas-powered power stations, and consequently, you can reduce the cost and the environmental impact. So why isn't tidal stream energy already fully commercialized? Well, the fundamental reason is there hasn't been sufficient investment to achieve the at-scale deployment to drive down the cost of energy to the same levels as fossil fuels and nuclear and wind and solar. Wind and solar did receive in that investment, initially quite reluctantly, and the cost of their energy has come tumbling down to well below that of nuclear and fossil fuel prices. So let's have a look at some of these prices. These are the prices for the different sorts of renewable energy. As you can see, I'm just moving, sorry, forgive me for a second. As you can see, this concentrated solar power is up at the top, and that's £183 per megawatt. If you come down to the bottom, the wind on shore is down at £59 per megawatt. And that's come down from 250 15 years ago. So how could tidal match that? Well, the initial cost of tidal, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, was £300 per megawatt in 2018. It's come down, even without massive deployment, just the turbines that are using the test sites, to £178 per megawatt in the latest auction round. And the offshore renewable energy catapult have worked out that it'll come down to £116 per megawatt by the end of this decade, and going right down ultimately to the same price and cheaper than wind by 2047. Moving now to the actual curve that shows how it's going to come down in price. I would just move all your lovely pictures to the right. You can see that by 2035, the graph, assuming a 1 gigawatt deployment of tidal, will come right down to £178 per megawatt, plus or minus £25. So it could be even less, or it could be more. But these projections are all very well, but what are they actually based on? What has tidal energy achieved to date? From this slide, you can see that we've already had 18 megawatts of, well, first of all, before I start on that, let's look down the small picture on the side of the UK. You can see the light blue areas all show very strong areas of tidal resource, all of which at different times, so they could be linked. So much so, those areas are so powerful that we actually enjoy 50% of Europe's resources of tidal, and nearly 10% of the global resources of tidal. So not only is Britain in the lead in the manufacturing side, but we also have some of the largest resources in the world. So we need to exploit these industrially and commercially as quickly as possible. Moving now to the actual achievements as well as having 18 megawatts deployed and grid connected, we've actually achieved 43 gigawatts of power to the grid. Now, you saw just now when I put the slide up, that's the equivalent of a whole power output for a given day. There's also 124 megawatts of sites preparing for the next auction round, and 500 million of mostly private investment has been ploughed into tidal to put it in a position to be ready to go. And there's a further 1 gigawatt of tides under development. So this is a nascent industry about to move forward. Now, what I'd like to do now is just summarize where we've got to in the tidal side with this short video.
Apart from being predictable, is a relatively inexhaustible source of energy. It's moon power. Focusing on the power of the sun and not enough time focusing on the power of the moon.
The biggest advantage that tidal energy offers is it's predictable. It works during the night, it works at times when it's cloudy, it works at times when it's not windy. So there's a massive opportunity, zero carbon energy source.
We need to think about having a mix of energy capacity. The challenges that we face as a society and as our communities have never been greater.
UK is no longer self-sufficient, even in fossil fuels.
We've said as a country that we're going to be carbon neutral. To make that commitment, we have to have all the resources at our disposal. From the data we've got, that can't be just solar and wind. It needs technologies like tidal.
It's a very, very compelling case for exploiting the untapped, inexhaustible energy present in the ocean.
Britain is in a unique position with regards to tidal stream energy in that we have 50% of the tidal resources in Europe and 9% of the global resources. So that means we're very well placed geographically.
Clearly, it's a great industry to be involved in because of the clean energy, but also because of the jobs that are created from it as well.
There's a diversification opportunity here to generate jobs and income from the sea spaces that are around the communities.
but it requires there to be some correct signals that show that the UK is serious about wanting marine energy to actually happen. There are tides all around the world, and other places around the world will want a technology. They will want a product. The UK could sell them that product. That is an opportunity that only the UK holds.
I want to help create a solution and make the world a more sustainable place. We're not doing anywhere near enough. Society does not have time to sit on its hands. We need to turbocharge this.
Oops, forgive me. That was a short video we put together in the early days of Tidal, and I think it's as relevant today as when we first made it. Okay, well, having covered the strategic reasons and the advantages of Tidal, I'd now like to just turn to our own company, which is Perpetuus Tidal Energy Centre, based in the Isle of Wight. This animation shows where the tidal resources to the south of the Isle of Wight, just to Catherine's point, and the surge of the red, as you see coming up, are when the tides, it's obviously fast forward, it's just over a 12-hour period, when the tides are at their strongest. And you can see that very dark red period there, area there, which would offer huge potential for making tidal energy. How are we going to do it? First of all, we'll put the tidal turbines in this 5 square kilometre area, 2.5 kilometres to the south of St Catherine's Point. They'll then be connected with cables coming ashore near Flowers Brook, and the substation will be on Flowers Brook as well. And this substation, taking quite significant amounts of power, will just be the size of a medium house. The project schematic, how's it going to work? You can see the turbines in the bottom on the ocean bed. They will either be on the ocean bed or they'll be on the surface moored so that we get the full range at the best part of the current, one third of the depth. They'll come via cables to junction boxes. The junction boxes will then go into buried cables up to a substation in Flowers Brook. That substation will convert it to the same power levels and frequency as the grid, and then get exported into the grid. The current project is 30 megawatts, and that's the capacity to deal with 80,000 megawatts of clean electricity. But for you and I, that's much more simply translated as 1/3 of the requirement for the Isle of Wight. The turbines are going to be located in this area, which we're showing here, just to the south of St Catherine's Point. This, we hope, will be the first commercial exploitation of tidal energy worldwide. That's tidal stream energy. And we hope that we will be then a living example or an actual example of how the rest of the world could follow suit. It was fully consented as a station in 2016, and we were about to start getting full investment and then building. But unfortunately, there was a government policy change in 2016, which meant that we could not receive the support that the wind and solar had had in the past. And as a consequence, we had to put the company into hibernation until we could persuade the government that this was a good investment. That happened. And in 2019, we came out of hibernation and we regenerated and reconsented the site. But what I also like to point out is, although this is a potentially successful 30 megawatt project, there's nearly 300 megawatts off the south of the island and more along the south coast. So exploiting that would then lead to enough power, subject to the gaps, of course, in the tide when the tide is not flowing, to power the whole of the Solent area. The turbines we're going to put in, the two either side, that's the one on the left and the one on the right, are the orbital turbines, and they're the floating turbines that I've talked about. They will be moored to the bottom. You'll see in a minute a little video of how they're going to operate, but the turbines will swing down into the water then, and the tidal flow one way, and then the blades will swing and the tidal flow the other way. So we'll get at least 40% of generation capacity and perhaps more as we develop. The one in the middle is a similar sort of system from SME. They were building in UK, in the Isle of Wight, in fact, but because of the government policy change, they've had to go abroad, and they're now building in UK, but exporting to Canada. And the one on the left is another company in UK called QED, and they're using well-known Dutch turbines, Tidal turbines, and they're about to put together an array, possibly to come and join us in PTEC farm. Just so you can see how these turbines work, I've done a little video, or I'm going to source a little video off the internet. It's an animation of the orbital turbine. The real attraction of this is because you don't need a hugely specialist vessel, you can use just a little tug like this one, or a little picking up vessel, you can cut the costs. It's also quite simple to moor. You have 4.5 moorings. And although they're using traditional anchors, they're looking to use different anchors which would be more efficient. And then they have a cable which runs ashore. These are the arms which swing the turbines down into the water. Now, not only is that a good idea to find the right tidal flow, but it's also a very good idea for maintenance, because they just swing back up, and you can use that small vessel to change the turbines, put a new one on, take the other one in for repair. This is the tide changing. The blades turn in a different direction. And they use conventional train solutions. So these are well-known turbines, so that again cuts costs. And this is the size of vessel that can come alongside. And because all the machinery and all the electronics are actually on board and they're very accessible, again you've cut costs. This is the second generation, there's a third being developed. So they're in a very strong position to actually go fully commercial when they need to. Our other partner in PTEC is the European Marine Energy Centre. It's a not-for-profit organisation which has 18 years of tidal projects experience. In fact, they've had something like 34 countries actually try tidal turbines there. They're the world-leading experts on marine energy. They're based in Scotland, in Orkney. And I think the other point I'd like to draw your attention to is the amazing economic value they've brought to Orkney. £35 million additional to the economy, 250 full-time jobs, 23 million invested in local infrastructure. And of course, they've become a specialist in island communities, which we will find very useful down in the Isle of Wight. Moving to the timelines now. How long have we been going and how did we do it? The ones we have been going for some time, and we did in 2016 actually have to go into hibernation. But the one I'd really like to draw your attention to is after you've achieved offshore planning, which was 2021, and we're just about to get the full license now, in next week, in fact, or this week, I hope. From that moment onwards, and when you get full investment, the site can be developed in 2 years. That's significantly quicker than the nuclear sites, which take 10+ years. And it's quicker than the gas sites as well. So we are a very good, quick interim solution into renewable energy. So what are the benefits to the Isle of Wight? Well, it's going to create new supply chains, develop new skills, bring jobs, careers, and retain some of the talent that they've been losing because the economy isn't strong up to that moment. It's also going to improve investment into local businesses and infrastructure. And we'll certainly create an renewables and sustainability cluster or hub on the Isle of Wight, possibly drawing together work on the carbon capture, green hydrogen, hydrogen gas grids, and hydrogen storage. So it could be an integral part of a hydrogen economy. It will attract business visitors and students. And Solent is particularly attractive to our company and to other companies in that 21% of the labor in the Solent is employed in the marine industry. And in the area, we've got the grid at Fawley. And the Isle of Wight gas grid is capable of hydrogen now. And there's the Fawley refinery for CO2, for H2 storage as well. And of course, you all recognize that there is a local market for hydrogen in the form of ferries, heating, shipping in the ports, the Isle of Wight gas grid, and ultimately, I think, fuel cells to make electricity. That's pretty well my presentation, but I think what I'd like to do now is just show you how mature the industry is and how it now needs to move forward with full investment. So I'm going to scoop another video off the internet so you can have a look.
With 40 gigawatt hours of marine power exported into the UK grid to date. Nova Innovation installed their first tidal stream device in 2016, and its success in powering homes and businesses in the Shetland Islands in Scotland is enabling them to continue to expand. With plans to make Bardsey Island in Wales an entirely tidal-powered island, as well as a tidal-powered whiskey distillery in the Sound of Islay. Atlantis installed the world's largest tidal energy farm in the same year. The 6-megawatt Maygen tidal stream project consists of 4 turbines, each with 8-meter blades, submerged on the seabed. In 2017, Sustainable Marine installed its 4-turbine Plat I floating tidal energy platform in Connell Sound near Oban for testing prior to transport and installation in Nova Scotia, Canada the following year. And we'd invite everyone coming to the UK for COP26 to visit Orbital Marine Power's O2 device, the world's most powerful tidal turbine, at the European Marine Energy Centre in Orkney, where it's powering the equivalent of 2,000 homes while offsetting 2,200 tonnes of CO2 production each year, and is also connected to an electrolyser to produce green hydrogen. The UK is supporting the development of wave energy as well as tidal stream energy, with companies like the Simply Blue Group, whose first wave energy project, Saoirse, announced in 2020, will harness the tremendous wave potential of the Atlantic, 4 kilometres off the coast of Clare in Ireland, using the core power technology that originally tested at EMEC in Scotland. The industry is already supporting high-wage, high-value manufacturing and technical jobs across the UK, supporting the regeneration of many of our coastal communities in Scotland, Wales, and the south of England. Sites such as PTEC on the Isle of Wight, Morlays in Anglesey, and the port of Milford Haven are all being developed to accelerate the growth of the sector. An industry analysis suggests that tidal stream alone could employ 4,000 people in the UK by 2030, in companies like Texo Fabrication, who manufactured Orbital's O2, making it the first vessel to launch from the port of Dundee since shipbuilding ended over 40 years ago. And in leading engineering firms like Quotient and environmental consultancies like Marine Space and Aquaterra, plus marine operations companies such as Green Marine and Leask, providing their expertise to the sector and exporting their competence abroad. Given the pace of cost reduction in the sector, independent analysis by the offshore renewable energy catapult suggests these technologies are on course to become cost competitive with other mainstream forms of low carbon generation within 1 gigawatt of deployment. And countries around the world are joining the UK in developing marine energy. Sustainable Marine is currently building the first phase of the 9-megawatt Bembach project, the world's first floating tidal energy array with multiple Plat I in the Minas Basin, Nova Scotia, which will power 3,000 homes. The Bembach project builds upon the experience gained from its demonstration projects in Grand Passage, Nova Scotia, and Connell, Scotland. And last year, the Canadian government signed a deal with Nova Innovation to develop the first phase of its 1.5 megawatt tidal energy project. When operational, it could generate enough power for around 3,000 homes in the region each year. And earlier this year, the first tidal stream project in Japan began generation in the waters of the Goto Islands. Renewable UK are encouraging coastal countries with strong ocean and tidal current to meet with us in the year of COP26. You will discover how you can use these innovative new technologies to support your journey to an economy with net zero carbon emissions.
What I'd like to do now is throw the whole thing open to questions. So Margaret, I'm very happy to take questions at this stage.
Right, thank you very much. That was a brilliant presentation, and I think there's definitely a green future ahead of us, and hopefully that this is taken up, because it seems a remarkably sensible, wise and also economic approach. There are some questions in the chat. Can you see them, or shall I read them to you?
Well, I can, yeah, I'll come out of this and I'll have a look at the questions. Hold on a sec. Okay, yeah. Where do you want me to start? Shall I go back to the beginning?
I think so, yes. Because people can then add into the chat any additional questions.
Okay,
so I think it starts off, I've wondered why vertical axis turbines, I think, is the first.
Where's that one?
About third one down.
Vertical axis turbines are not used more. Okay, well, the reason vertical axis turbines haven't been used in the past is because the focus has always been on very high powered tidal streams. And when you get up above about 2.5 meters per second, it's quite hard to produce a vertical axis turbine, which is strong enough to withstand the forces. However, we've recently been approached by a company that are looking at vertical axis turbines for the lower flow levels, which of course then would increase the yield. And actually that becomes extremely interesting. So they've not been used to date, but they are suddenly emerging as a potential candidate for lower tidal streams, because they can cope and they can be small, they don't have to be hugely powerful and therefore very heavy.
Thank you. Next question is coming on.
Well, I see there's an investor wants it. Yeah. Thank you for the offer of investment. We really would love some investment, to be honest. My website is there. If you go to the website and leave a message on the website, I'm sure we can get in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. How many vessels or turbines are needed in the project, providing the equivalent of 1/3? Oh, right. I would say, just let me work that out for you. That would be probably about 12 turbines. But we're waiting to see the turbines we're hoping to use. We're just doing expressions of interest at the moment, and it ranges from 1.5 to 3 megawatts per turbine. So it could be 10 or it could be about 12. Well, we know Orbital produce excellent turbines, and it could easily be around 12 turbines. The next one is it possible to co-locate wave and tidal and offshore wind for efficient use? Do you know, I think ultimately it probably would be, but generally speaking, the best wind is in the is to the east of UK, whereas the best tides are very much on the west of UK. So actually, it's not feasible or economically feasible at the moment. But as we look at floating wind, I do think there is an opportunity perhaps to start combining some of these capabilities. But the most important thing is to actually let's start deploying some of these floating wind and tidal turbines at scale now, so we can just see what the art of the possible is. Don't even get a break, do you, if you're reading them?
Well, again, I think, one of the things actually give you a chance to get your breath back. Can I just actually add in something that you mentioned about the European Maritime Engineering Centre at Orkney?
Yes.
And we have actually had a BCS Zoom meeting about this. So if you look on the past events under the Green IT, it came up in June. So this is a few months ago, and they were actually going through and they looked at 4 wave and 4 tidal ones and explained how the whole system worked up in the Orkneys. So this is a marvelous one to rewatch this and also watch that one as well.
Yeah, I'd recommend that. I mean, that's EMEC are the world leading test center for maritime industries, maritime energy, and they have everything up there. They have wind. They're just putting in a new floating wind test site. They've got tidal, and because they've got generating so much renewable power, and the grid isn't capable of taking it into the main grid, they're now producing hydrogen, and they've got 2 companies. One is looking at aeroplane flight using hydrogen, and another is looking to replace the diesel engines in the local ferry with hydrogen. And I know they're driving local hydrogen cars around as well. So it's a very enterprising and interesting area, which is just growing like topsy.
I do recommend having a look at that presentation. And also, I think it's slightly stunning when you're saying they're producing so much that the grid can't take it. You know.
No, it's not stunning. Actually, it's disappointing because
well, that's true.
Really, I mean, I'm not being critical, but it's stunning that we've got the energy, but it's rather disappointing that we're not putting the investment into putting the grids in so that the energy can be piped down south and onto the mainland. So I think all these new renewable energy capabilities are going to put pressure on the grid, and the grid will need to be improved. I mean, there's lots of stories going on at the moment about how perhaps it might be better to go to local grids, which would improve energy security. But I know work is going on at the national grid to try and work out the best way to do it and to improve the grid.
Fantastic. And coming back to your next comment that came in.
Well, there's one there from John Davis to everyone. Thank you to everyone. No, actually, I was going to look at, there was one about the political side. Where's that?
I think there's one, the next one coming up was this excellent presentation, ready to go for presentation to government.
Oh, yes.
Plans are there.
Yeah, that's right.
To government.
Well, Mike, we have been presenting to government for something like 5 years now. And the real issue there is that I'm afraid UK is very focused on short-term gain. So in the political world, of course, it's a 4-year election, 4 to 5 year election cycle. So anything that's not going to deliver some really good outputs and get the next government re-elected doesn't always make it past the police, the desk police of the ministers. And the other problem, it's not just ministers that are a problem. It is that in venture capital companies, a lot of them are looking to buy in 3 years and then sell out after 5 years. So again, it's short term. Well, we can't compete on that kind of price at the short term because we need at scale deployment and full investment. So until that happens, we are always going to be struggling to compete. And then when you think we're the new industry on the block, wind, solar, fossil fuels, all of whom have been around and all are very big industries and all have very strong lobby capability, it is particularly difficult for us to get our message heard to government. I think we've almost made it in that we did get something in the contract for difference auction last time. But unless there's a clear policy of growing tidal over the years, then the problem is investors will say, well, this might be a flash in the pan and we're not going to invest. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but I think we might just be turning the corner.
That's very positive.
Wave power. Yes, there's a question here on wave power. No, wave, is it dead in the water? Excuse the pun. No, Graham, it's not dead in the water. In fact, it's making big progress suddenly now. It's about, in terms of development and technology readiness state, it's probably about 5 years behind tidal at the moment because there isn't really a commercial capability. There's a lot of test sites and there's some very good results. In fact, I think it's the latest wind capability, which I think you saw a picture of in the film, is actually producing results 20% better than they anticipated. So it's coming. And I saw a study recently that if you put proper tidal wave capability on the west coast of the States, it could provide 50% of their power. So again, I think, whilst I don't think it's the panacea, I do think that it's worth considering and pursuing, as we need more renewable energy. For goodness sake, let's try these innovative capabilities. And I think we've probably run out of questions there.
I think there was one just before that one. Is biofouling expected to be a challenge?
No. Well, yes, of course it's a challenge, because you have to pay attention to it and you have to make sure that you don't have too much biofouling. But we haven't. The thing is about it, if you go to the ability to change turbines quite regularly, then actually you can lift the turbines up, change a turbine, take it away for maintenance, put another one on at the same time, and you're only stopping generation for about 6 hours. So it's always a challenge, and it's always something you need to be constantly looking at, but it's certainly not a stopper.
Thank you. Another one then, is there a limit to the number of turbines to a given area?
Good question. We don't, yes, there would be. I mean, if they had hundreds of turbines very close together, they would change the flow of the water in the in the actual tidal stream. But in fact, what we've been doing recently with Plymouth University is looking at ways of mounting the turbine, so any change of flow is picked up by another turbine and the flow comes back another way. The water has to go somewhere, and the studies that we've done recently would show that the kind of arrays we're intending to put in would not change the flow, but you would have to be conscious of just how many turbines you put in, and you'd have to do it scientifically. So it's a kind of yes, but we found a way around it.
I think that's actually interesting, because are there many universities active in research in this area?
Yeah, there are. Plymouth is very active in this area. Edinburgh University is very active. Southampton's pretty active as well. All of the, and let me see, are there any other? I think Newcastle is involved. So yes, this is an area of real interest.
So again, it might even be a future career that people ought to be thinking about.
Oh, I think it's an excellent career. Yeah, certainly if my grandchildren wanted to go and do it, I would very much recommend it, because it's a new manufacturing industry. It's high-tech area. It's environmentally sound. I mean, it's in complete harmony with the environment, and it's producing energy, which is a fundamental part of any economy. So yeah, I think this is an amazing career to get involved in.
Seems to be sort of a 100% win. There's a question about most industries have trade organizations. Is there one for Tidal? I assume the term is yet.
There is one for Tidal. It's called the Marine Energies Council. But it's not as well funded as some of the others. And in fact, Renewable UK also do some work on Tidal, but the predominant number of members for Renewable UK are wind, and therefore their emphasis on wind, but they have been helping us with the Tidal as well. And we have another very small trade association in the form of the Marine Energies Council, which consists of just a couple of people, but they do some fantastic work lobbying government.
Yes, not sure I understand the next one.
Tidal turbines operate and store in the middle of the sea to power ships en route. The simple answer to that at the moment is no. But I mean, just in that area, if you're looking at hydrogen power, although I think probably most ships will be on ammonia, but anyway, if you're looking to power in the ships in the hydrogen economy, one thing we looked at in conjunction with another company called Hydrowing was the idea of making hydrogen at sea and having the ships come and collect the hydrogen to take it back ashore. But I guess if you project that in a Jules Verne sort of way, you could probably have that as a hydrogen storage and a hydrogen area where ships could top up. But that's not, I haven't seen any plans for that at the moment, but one can use one's imagination here.
There's a question about protecting marine areas. I think you mentioned this already.
I did. Yeah, I think it would be a kind of useful marine area, in that you wouldn't just not allow anyone in there. What we've seen is that certainly the mammals and the fish are not killed or damaged by the turbines. I think we've seen very few instances of that, because the turbine blades turn so slowly, and because most of the fish will go around it. And I think, talking to my brother-in-law, who is a marine biologist and a zoologist, and he's in Auckland University, he was saying that, yeah, this almost certainly could create a reef-like prospect with increased breeding, and of course the fishermen wouldn't be able to go in there. Now, that would annoy the fishermen, of course, and I think we're still talking to the Isle of Wight fishermen, who are a bit grumpy with us. But when you look at what's happened in Orkney, they have worked together with the fishermen, so that they've made sure that where they have taken areas to put the turbines in, what happens is the lobsters and crabs actually breed better in those areas, and they've partnered with the fishing fleet in order to let them provide some of the service, some of the boat services. So everyone gets some benefit from it. And so the fishermen are not excluded, and the marine life is protected, and actually the breeding increases. Now, I haven't put my hand on a study and say that as a fact, but that's what we've seen empirically.
Can I add on to that one, that for those that have actually seen the June BCS webinar, or will actually look at it again, this point was discussed, and Neil, the managing director, described again how definitely the positive effect it's been having, particularly as, say, like the lobsters grow and then they expand out of the area. So what the fishermen were catching was larger, more established crabs and lobsters than they would have done previously. So yeah, it's been positive.
We did, and we went up to talk to the fisheries in Orkney, and they were explaining actually they're working quite closely and well with the EMEC now. And I think that's our ambition with the fishermen in the Isle of Wight. We would like to work together with them so we can provide additional employment opportunities, and they can keep their fishing going. There's one here from the yacht clubs. I knew I'd get that one. I'm a yachtsman as well, so I've done the Round the Island race, and our site is outside the Round the Island race route and inside the shipping lanes. So hopefully we will not interfere with the current plans for racing around the island.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Roger, to everyone, how deep below the surface would the turbines been installed, and would they be a hazard to shipping? Well, you saw one is on the surface, the others would be on the bottom, and they would be in an area which would be probably an exclusion zone marked by buoys. But generally speaking, in order to get permission from the Marine Maritime Organization, the MMO, it's a kind of planning committee for the ocean. We have to make sure that whatever we do dovetails into potential shipping routes, fishing routes, etc., and is not a harm to the environment. So we went through a £2 million study, which lasted for, I think, 2.5 years, examining every facet of how we affected the environment, and we got a clean bill of health.
That sounds great. Anything else that there's a question about, could you share the links for presentations? Yes, hopefully.
Yeah, they're available on the internet. So
and I've just put them into the chat as well.
Okay.
So they're all there if you'd like to take them down from the chat. The slides from this should be up certainly within a week, and the presentations probably within about 3 weeks, and it will go onto the site where it comes from. This was absolutely fantastic, and certainly the comparative cost I think you're talking about between the different sorts of green energy does make looking at the sea a very realistic option that we should be looking at.
I just like to jump in there. I wouldn't advocate that we are better or we should use tidal versus solar versus wind. That's not our role at all. What we're saying is all these renewable energies should be complementary, and they can be complementary. And we're just doing a study with Plymouth University, which is about to be published, to demonstrate that actually combining solar, tidal, and some hydrogen, making hydrogen during the curtailment periods, i.e. when the electricity is not required, could be combined to produce a totally renewable grid in the Isle of Wight. Now, the costs at the moment would be excessive and not commercial, but I think the very fact that you can do it, and when economies of scale start to apply to tidal and to hydrogen, it becomes a real possibility and a very good way of testing the system before we export it into the whole of the UK.
Do you think in the future that we could be, not only with, as you said, with tidal, but with solar and wind, we could be self-sufficient in the UK?
Probably, yes. I think you'd need all sorts of things. You'd need ways of storing. I think you'd need hydrogen as well. One of the things we looked at with the hydrogen is whilst you're not using the electricity on the grid, and the grid is a zero-sum game. So when you don't need the electricity, you have to turn everything off because you can't store it. So what we're suggesting is when you don't need tidal, or you don't need wind, or you don't need solar, then you make hydrogen with it and you store the hydrogen. And there are places you can store it on the Isle of Wight, and there are places we can store it next to a deep water berth. And if you do that, of course, then you've got ferries and heating and land transport, all of which could use that hydrogen. And I think a lot of people are waiting to see where they're going to get their hydrogen from before they decide to switch to a hydrogen economy. And so tidal could provide that, and so could solar, certainly in the Isle of Wight.
Fantastic. I think this was brilliant. There's a couple of other comments that have just come through. Thanking you for a great presentation.
Thank you.
I now have a clearer understanding of tidal energy. Thank you. Britain has led on this and should do so more. I see it in conjunction with the other forms of renewable energy, as you have said. Totally agree. I think that's 100%.
Can I just add to that? I think the other thing I didn't really draw out strongly, but it came out in the films, is most of the tidal turbines at the moment are 80% British made. And we were in this position with wind turbines in the early days, and the government took so long to install wind that the majority of the wind power, the majority of the profits from wind now go abroad to Denmark and to Germany. And I just feel quite strongly that actually we haven't got much manufacturing in UK now, and this is a real opportunity to capitalize on the 80%. But if we're not using tidal energy ourselves in UK, it's quite hard to sell it abroad. So we need to get on with it.
Good point. Very insightful, and pleased that the universities are exploring further through research. So there's a lot of very positive comments there, and I'd like to thank you so much. As I said, if you look in the chat, there is the actual links to all the various clips that Rob showed. And I think this was an amazing presentation. And I really think that this is wonderful. And I think that, again, if you have time to go back and look at the presentation from the Orkney that was in the June one, again, this I think you will find useful. And if you're interested in this, because I think there's a lot to be said for the alternative ways, and we are surrounded by sea, and it seems a shame not to utilize it. I do seem to remember a long time ago when we first had gas, we were told all the gas would be absolutely free, but I don't think that worked out.
Margaret, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm delighted I've just exposed Tidal a little bit and the capabilities of Tidal to your audience, and hopefully we'll continue to make progress. So thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you again.